the first thing that we're going to do is draw around Angela's foot. So I've got a pencil. I'm holding it pretty much straight up and down around the toes, but I'm going to kind of angle it in a bit to get where the foot actually touches the ground. The back of the heel is really important to get that nicely drawn, just tucking under as if you kind of get the image of what it would look like if you were walking on a beach on wet sand and the footprint that you'd find behind you. Okay, so I'm going to take that and turn it into a sole pattern. This is the foot pattern that I got, and I'm trying to add a nice shape up here in the toe area, not exactly duplicating the size of the foot. And I'm not making it much longer than the big toe. I've learned that these shoes kind of grow a bit and they turn out to be bigger than you expect, so I'm not making it much longer than that big toe. And I kind of straighten it out through here, try to exactly duplicate the heel. So we'll see. We'll make a mock-up eventually, and if it's too small, then we'll make it bigger. But this is what I'm going with for now. I've cut out the sole pattern from a piece of foam core. You could use a thick piece of cardboard to do the same thing, but using a utility knife you can get a really accurate representation on the foam core. Then I'm going to make a little duct tape wall around from the ball on one side of the foot to the ball on the other side of the foot. And to do that, first of all, I've learned to add a little strip of paper on the duct tape. I'm going to cut off the excess of the paper and then fold this. You fold it, in other words, I put the paper on there because I've goofed up so many times by the tape sticking to itself when I'm trying to fold it. So now I put the paper on, and so I'm folding it so that it's supposed to be about 5/8 of an inch high and leaving a little bit that's not taped. And then I'm going to make a wall from the ball on one side to the ball on the other side. And then I'm going to just anchor all the tape here. So I've got my nice little wall, so a little longer here. I'll cut that off, but it doesn't really matter. I want you to notice how the back of the heel is really important, that just where the heel touches the ground, that goes right at the back of this sole. And so you can see we've got now a space up there between the toes and the edge of the sole. And so I was trying to figure out what I could put in there to even out the area, and since my little granddaughter frequently plays with Play-Doh, I realized that it's the perfect material. So I'm going to fill in these spaces with Play-Doh, but I don't want to add any height to the toes. You've got plenty of height here, so I'm going to mold it as best I can so that it just fills in the area, but it doesn't make the toes any higher than they are. and I don't want it to push out against the wall either. So something like that. So this is the closest way to represent a custom last, a shape that will be the shape of the inside of the shoe that accommodates the foot, but has a nice shape to it and a nice toe box area also. So now I'm ready to put this foot into a nylon stocking and start making the tape pattern over the foot. I've now put a nylon stocking over the whole thing of the tape and the Play-Doh and the foot, and now I'll start putting on the duct tape. Notice that you want to make sure the person has their weight equally distributed on their feet. So the feet need to be lined up, of course, far enough apart so that you can tape in there. Okay. Alright, I've put another piece of foam core under the foot and under the more accurate sole shape that's under the foot. And so now I'm going to cover the foot with duct tape to get a mold. And so it's real important that I get it right up against that foam core sole. And so I've got this kind of coming at a diagonal. I've got some pieces cut off here, and I'm going to overlap about a quarter of an inch or so, at least a quarter of an inch. And each time really marking that line very clearly. So I'm going to make her a little duct tape shoe. Let's see, get a little shorter piece as I come up here. This is kind of the flexible kind of duct tape, so that's helpful to get one that you can really mold well. And on the toe area you can kind of split the tape to kind of flare it out. It doesn't matter really if you get some places where you have to pinch the tape together. Just get it up against the sole. That's the important thing. And around the back of the heel, it's really important that we get a nice shape there too. So I'll work my way back there and I'll show you how to do that in just a minute. Back here at the heel, I'm going to want to get this rounded shape. So I'm pushing up against the foam core, but really getting the heel as kind of a little bowl shape that holds the heel in place. So I'm going to make sure the tape goes round. Maybe a slit in this would have helped. I'll flip the next one. And the opposite slit that I do on the toe area. So just a little slit there to help it mold a little easier. This is also a little low, so I'm going to add another strip up above it. But here I'm getting the roundness that I want. I'll add this up here. Okay, that feels good. Now I'm going to this completes one layer on the foot. I've done the toe area and the inside. So I have to put another layer on, but going in the opposite direction, or at least not the same direction. So I'm going to take a long piece and try to get it right lined up along that sole edge. So that gives it strength by going in more of a horizontal plane. And another one right above that on this side. So I've got two layers. Going there, and I'll make sure to extend them up in the toe area. That first one didn't quite make it. So I'll then put the long pieces of duct tape on the inside of the foot, and then the taping will be complete. Now that the taping is finished, I'm going to just eyeball a center line here best I can, and also down the heel, and where I'm going to cut the tape off. This isn't going to be the... I'm going to do a lot more with this after the person's foot gets out of here, but kind of a general area of where to cut. And then down the back of the heel, and then we'll cut it off, and she can step out. So the best place to cut is the outside of the foot. Of course, be careful. Little cuts. We'll tape this back together. Remove the Play-Doh, and it's as good as new, and I'm going to tape this back together and then show you the next step. Now that I have the human extracted from the tape shoe model here, I taped it back up so it's intact, and I want to make stitching marks around this line, the line where the sole meets the flat piece under it. So I set my compass at 3/8 of an inch, which is how far apart I want my stitches to be, and then I just go along here, move it, and make the marks every 3/8 of an inch. And then I'm using a Sharpie fine point to go over that, and I'm making marks on both the flat part and the side of the shoe. So I'm darkening and making these very obvious. So when I'm going to cut this shoe off, I'll have marks to show where the stitching holes are going to go on the sole and also on the upper. I have my marks at 3/8 of an inch interval all the way around the shoe, and so then I wanted to kind of draw how I thought this shoe would look, and I'm making it to look a lot like this one that I have made for myself out of this beautiful blue Pergamena vegetable tan leather, tanned in New York State. So I think I'll make the same shoe for my friend. And to use this process, you will have this kind of Nomoc edge and a center seam. After you've made the shoe with a center seam and gotten used to that, then you can move on to making a shoe without that center seam, but it's an easy way to get started. Now I will cut the shoe off of the sole piece right on that line that I drew all the way around until you get lift off. Here it comes. So now they're separated. I've set the sole pattern that we used inside this area. This is the paper pattern, and I'm going to transfer all those marks onto this pattern. So I think you might be getting the idea of how when this sole pattern, when the sole has all of these marks for stitching holes, and the upper has the similar marks, the marks in the same place for the upper, then that's how you align the shoe and have it fit nicely. So we'll see how that works out. I'll make these marks on the sole and then we'll work on the upper. I've just cut the shoe part right down that center line here and then right down the line at the back of the heel, and I'm going to get the foam core sole that we used out of there. After I cut this upper piece down the center of the front of the foot line and the heel line, I kind of took my finger and flattened it out. You can see that going from 3-dimension to 2-dimension is going to make some things that are just not perfect. Some places it's a little bit mashed together, but it all seems to work out. So here's the second piece, and I'm pulling the remains of this stocking out. I don't think you'll ever use this again or wear it or anything, so that'll just be trashed. And then I'll flatten this one out. And I'm not going to do anything to change the shape of the heel. But as I come up here, trying to get this all evened out so the stitches are still 3/8 of an inch apart. But as I get up here, I need to lie this down flat by cutting it. So I'm going about the 5/8 of an inch up, between right in the middle of each of my stitch marks. And I'll do this for 5 or 6 stitches. The part that seems like it's having trouble lying down flat. And then I'll fan this out so there's space between these stitches and that the line here is as straight as possible. So now I have both of these patterns on paper, and I'll cut them out, ready for the next step towards making a meane form. Now I'm making something that is called the meane form, meaning the average of the two halves of the shoe. So first I drew around. Oh, by the way, I've changed the style of shoe that I'm going to make. Instead of having those tabs, I just happened to notice a picture of an earth shoe that has a nice kind of center seam motif down the front, and I thought, that's really cool. So I'm changing the shape so that it will more match that one. So I drew around this one the outside of the shoe, and now I'm going to overlap, lining up the top of the heel here, or actually the bottom of the heel I line up with the tip of the toe, and then draw around that. Wow, quite a difference between the two shapes. So the outside of the foot is quite a bit wider, and then there's a pretty pronounced area for the toe here. But the center lines lined up really nicely, as did the back of the heel line. Usually there's a little more discrepancy, and I find the average of the two. So that's what the mean means, finding the average, the lines here, the average. If these weren't lined up that well, I would find the middle between the two lines that I had and go for that. And here I have the top line. This is my guess of what the top line should look like, and there's not much discrepancy from the inside and the outside on that. So I want these lines to all be the same, the back of the heel, the top line, and this front seam, or the vamp seam, but the bottoms of the patterns need to each be unique. So I'm going to cut this whole thing out and make the two patterns from it, the pattern for the outside of the shoe and the pattern for the inside of the shoe. So since I want the pattern for the inside and outside of the shoe, I'm going to first do the outside. So I'm going to copy back here, along here, and I've cut the little toe piece free so I can draw the line from the outside of the shoe. Then I get the outside of the shoe here. So all that I have to do is just connect here, and I've got the outside of this shoe. And then I'm going to cut away this excess part that was for the outside of the shoe and tape the little toe piece back in place, and then I'll have the pattern for the inside of the shoe. Here are the two pattern pieces cut out. So when I line up this center seam, that's what I get. Except remember that I had a piece of foam core under Angela's foot, and so I have to subtract the thickness of the foam core because we brought the tape down alongside that. And then also the sole will have this extra width here that turns up a little bit, so I'm going to remove about 3/8 of an inch from the pattern because of this sole edge, and then about a 1/4 of an inch because of the foam core. So I'm cutting this off and cutting this off of this pattern, and then I'll work on making the sole. There we go. So it's going to be like this for the upper. To make the patterns that are going to be useful, I need to stitch right along this line, the edge of the sole. So that means I need a little bit of seam allowance outside of this sole, so that I have a place to stitch. So then I took a compass and took this pattern and added 1/8 of an inch all the way around it. So I put it on here and went around here with the compass and with it set at 1/8 of an inch, and added just a little bit so I'd have a place then where I could stitch right alongside the edge of the actual foot. And for the top sole of the soling, I needed something a little bit bigger than that, so that the edge could turn up a bit and I'd have room for the stitching holes. So I took my original pattern and added about 3/8 of an inch to the basic sole pattern. And so I did this same thing of using the compass, but of course set at the 3/8 inch instead of 1/8 of an inch, and copied all those marks onto it. And then, as you can see here, I've already punched the stitching holes. So these are the holes that I've been after all along, trying to get stitching holes on the top sole that would match up with the stitching holes on the upper. I'll show you the two ways that you can make these stitching holes. This is the way that I did it, just to save my wrists or thumbs a little bit. And so I used this hand punch. It's a 1/16 inch or 0-0 punch, and under this I have an end cut cutting board, and that works really well because you can, after you've got it all marked up, you can either plane off the top or sand it, and you've got a new surface to work with. So that's the way that I made these holes. I made them about 1/8 inch in from the edge. I drew a line there with my compass to get them lined up properly. I could have used this spring punch. This is also the 0-0, and anytime that you use something like, use one of these punches, put some of the same material behind it so the punch can go all the way through the upper piece and make a clear cut. So I used these two patterns that I made to cut out the components of the sole. This is the one with just the 1/8 inch added all around. So this is my bottom sole. I usually use layers of inner tube, preferably truck or tractor, since it's a little thicker, for soling these days. But since Angela is a school teacher, I thought this natural rubber cushioning would be a good thing for her to have on the bottom of her sole. So that's what I'm using here. And so this is cut to this size, and then this is the top sole that's going to go on there, and I made it by using this pattern. Of course, I had to turn it upside down. I've put Eco-Weld non-toxic kind of water-based contact cement on both of these surfaces, and it has dried. I'm doing this I'm doing this important job of hovering this bottom sole over the top sole so that I get the edge the same distance peeking around on all sides. Otherwise, the top sole is going to be wider or more narrow in certain areas. So I think I've got it here, with just the stitching holes barely sticking out. And to stitch these layers together, I'm going to use a stitching awl, and I'll use a tan string, since I want you to be able to see it, but of course usually I would use black. You can go along here and mark stitching holes every 3/8 of an inch. For this demonstration, I'll forego that and start somewhere and there are directions for how to use the stitching awl on Tandy Leather videos, so I'm not going to show you the whole process of using the stitching awl here, but do a stitch or two. So the first stitch that you do is simply to get the bobbin thread, or the underside thread, on the bottom of where you're stitching. So now I've got the thread through, and I've got an equal part up above and below the sole, equalize that out. Then I go about 3/8 of an inch over, pull with these index fingers and push the stitching all through, pull it back, and I'm putting the bobbin thread through the loop that forms. The loop forms because there's a groove in one side of the stitching awl needle, and the sticky thread, the waxy thread, after a time or two will start sticking in there, but never can be quite sure. I usually check it with my thumb. By the way, when I first pulled the bobbin thread through to the back, I pulled that out of the ungrooved side, so it's all ungrooved on the bottom. Now I put the bobbin thread through that loop on the ungrooved side, push with my thumb and pull it back, and I've made my stitch. So I pull it nice and tight so it's off of the bottom of the shoe, pulled up where it's not going to be worn out as fast, and I'm just going to continue on around the sole then, completing the bottom sole and top sole all stitched together. So, using these patterns, I'm first going to make a mock-up. I don't want to cut my nice leather until I have a sense that this shoe is going to fit. So I made a mock-up of 2 pieces of the inexpensive kind of felt that you can get at any fabric store. And to make those 2 layers of felt stay together, I stitched it on a regular sewing machine with a zigzag stitch. And to do that, it's best if you don't cut the bottom piece until after you've zigzagged. So just lay a piece, like this piece had this extra bit around it, so that you don't have to try to keep the 2 lined up all the time, and then cut the excess off afterwards, like I'm doing now. So you might just cut like a long rectangle and put it behind this, and so now I've got my 2 pieces for the upper, and I've transferred the stitching marks from the upper pattern. I've transferred those marks right along here, and with felt I don't have to punch out all of those holes. I can stitch right through the felt without having a hole there first. And then here I'm going to complete marking off these stitching holes. Just go along and mark where you see them. As you go through this process, you might find some places where the stitching holes seem a little far apart or close together, and you can change that just a little bit. For instance, if I thought those weren't correctly spaced, what I usually do is count 5 stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and make a mark there, and then I just make the center mark and then the center mark like that, and so that gets those stitches more equal in size. Since when we press this down, we press down the duct tape, some places where the stitching marks got pressed a little bit more together than in other places. Okay, so just continue with that, and then I will be stitching the upper together and then stitching it to the completely stitched soling, and then having Angela try it on and see how it fits. I'm using a whip stitch here to stitch this shoe together at the back of the heel and down the line at the vamp. So I'm just about finished here, and here I've stitched. So I've got the upper part of the shoe just about complete. I have my little stitching marks all around the edge, and so after I finish stitching the 2 layers of the sole together, then I'll stitch the sole and the upper together and try on the shoe. I am so excited to see how nicely this mock-up fits. I didn't spend any time on showing you how to stitch the shoe together, because we're going to do that when we make the actual shoe, but I like this color, the way this looks. I'd love to make a shoe like this in beige for Angela. Now that our patterns are made, we'll progress to using them to cut out the pieces that we need to make the shoe. And I've transferred the marks for where the stitching holes go, so they've all been punched out along the edge of the pattern. I'm making the left foot shoe right now, so that means I had to make sure I flipped the patterns over, because the top side of the pattern was for the right foot. And then I'm also cutting out my topsole, and so you have to kind of visualize how it would look turned upside down. And turned upside down, this is the correct way to align it for making the left foot. I can cut these out 2 different ways. I can either draw around this with a silver gel pen and mark all my stitching holes, or I can use a rotary cutter, and I have this on the rotary cutting board that allows me to cut right along here. So if you plan to do much of this, you might want to get a rotary cutter and the backing plastic board, and it's kind of a free form, but you can get a nice smooth edge cutting with the rotary cutter. So I'll cut out all 3 of these pieces, transfer all the stitching holes onto the leather, and then punch out the stitching holes in the next step. to make the sole, I'm using this roll of natural rubber, plantation crepe it's also called. I can't cut this with the rotary cutter, so I have to draw my outline with the silver pen and then cut it out with leather cutting scissors, you know, are a little stronger, so they really work the best. So then I'll cut along this line. You can certainly use the layers of inner tube, car, tractor, or truck inner tube to make the soles for this shoe. So if you, you're not too likely to have this natural rubber, although I do at times sell it on my website. Using the number of layers that you want, 3 or 4 layers of the inner tube cemented together, will also make a nice sole for a Nomoc or Lomoc shoe. I started stitching this side from where I thought the two pieces, the two halves of the shoe would be joined together, and so I've made the stitching slits all the way along using the thonging chisel, and I've stitched with 2 needles, and half of the thread went on the back side of the shoe, the other half on the front, and so I pulled this loop through with 1 thread and then come with the other thread from the back. So that's the 2 needle running stitch. I have a video about how to do that stitch on my website, and give a little tug. So a couple more stitches here, and I'm always bringing this thread from the back over, so it's crossing over the top of the thread that just came through the hole. That makes a nice neat looking edge. And I'll probably dye this top edge with a mulberry eco dye. That color looks good with red, and so it will kind of blend the top edge. I did line this shoe, and so this stitching is important to hold the 2 layers together, and I need to dye it so that the 2 layers kind of meld a little better. Now I'm ready to start putting this shoe together. So I'm putting the 2 heel ends of the shoe together, and I'm going to hold them together. If you have some double-sided tape, then that will hold them together, or you can use a little cement. I usually start pulling the double-sided tape off, line it up at the top, line it up, and then I'll use the thonging chisel to make slits back there. I use my wing divider again to make a line. And then punch these holes. Then take off the tape and I'll do a stitch called the X and bar, and that stitch is I also have a video for how to do that stitch, so you'll get it in more detail on the other video. And I want the X and bar, this this stitch makes X's and with a bar under it, so it looks kind of like hourglasses on one side, and on the other side it just has bars. And so I'm going to put the X and a bar on the inside of this shoe. It seems like it's a little better for not having too many layers of thread, so it might be better on more gentle on the back of the heel. And then the other thread making the other leg of the cross stitch. Okay, there's my little X. And then I'll take one of the threads and make a little bar at the bottom of the X. So check out the other video to get this in more detail. And then I'm going to pull my stitches and continue making the next X all the way down to the bottom. So the other thing that I have to do is make that same stitch on the front of the shoe, except this time, so I'm using when I stitched the top line on one side, I started at the heel and came up here, so then I would have the two threads for the 2-needle running stitch available to finish off the front of the shoe. The other side, I started it right where I thought the stitching of the two pieces together would begin, and so then I went all the way back, and I'm using that thread to go down the heel. So there's two pieces of thread that have been used, and so now I'm ready to stitch this front part together. So I've transferred my needles, and I'm going to make a bar across. So I'm just going to go to that last stitch there and last stitch here, and make a bar across. And I might do that twice just to strengthen it a little bit. So I have my threads here ready to make the next bar. On the back side, I just see X's. I'm not making the bar. I'm not doing the X and bar. I'm just doing the X because, you know, we don't need 3 bars across. 2 will be just fine. So I'll continue then with the bars and crossing over down to the next place where next stitch where I'll make another bar, and I'm going to try to line these up so they don't cross over each other, so they look neater. And then when I finish this, the upper will be stitched. What I'm lacking is a heel cover to go over the stitching back here, and it provides a little heel support, and then the strap that's going to go across to make these more of a Mary Jane style. I'm going to simulate cutting out this strap because I've already cut the second strap out to show you how I line it. So this is with the rotary cutter pad underneath, and the rotary cutter and this straight edge that is great to have too. So I would just roll along here, and I would check that I've got it at the right thickness. This is 5/8 of an inch and 5/8 of an inch, and then cut it out. Or if you don't have the rotary equipment, then you can just make a line with a silver gel pen and cut it out with scissors. Okay, I'm ready. So here's the strip that I cut to use for the strap, and someone gave me a suede skirt, and this is the lining from it, so I'm using that here. So I'm just since the cement is dried on both of them, I'm putting my strap as straight as I can onto the lining, and then I'll cut the lining either with scissors or with the rotary cutter to match. And I'll probably dye the edges of this, and then I'll do the same thing you've seen several times here. I will use the wing divider to make me a stitching line, and I'll get my thonging chisel and punch slits all the way down the strap, and then I'll use that same 2-needle running stitch to stitch all around the edge of it so that the lining stays firmly attached, and also it just makes the strap look much better to have stitching around it. Okay, here's the completed strap and stitched all around it, and so the next thing I'll do with this is to catch it in the stitching when I stitch the upper to the sole. I've completed the X's and the bar stitching shows up here on the outside, and so at the heel piece. So to finish off, I'll tie a square knot and then run the ends back up. And I do this on the outside because I'm going to put a heel cover to cover this. So run each stitch up and cut it off, and I'm ready to make the heel cover. So I've made a pattern, and I'm going to cement this in place so that it hides that stitching and gives a little more support at the heel. Okay, I've got the stitching at the heel knotted and the ends tucked away. So I've cut out the heel piece. Sometimes it gets kind of thick with the heel piece and the heel support piece here, the heel cover. And so this is where something called skiving comes in. This is a very simple little tool. Leather workers usually use a knife, but just to show you that if I wanted to thin this off a little bit, I would use the skiver. And this is a piece of glass from a junked car, so something smooth like this is needed. So I want to know where the center is here, and so I'm making a mark with the gel pen and then placing that center mark on the center of where the heel edge is, and I'll cut this off so it'll line up, but I want to make marks here so I'll know where to place this. I could sand it and cement it with contact cement, but again I'll use double-sided tape since that's faster. I don't know that it really makes any difference what you use, so I'll more tape here. And line it up. So it's centered. And then I'll do the same thing of using the wing divider to make a line, using the little thonging chisel on a cutting board to make stitching slits all the way around here, and then using the 2-needle running stitch to stitch around the edge of it. And I think I will put a little dye on this before I stitch it, so the edge will just look a little neater. So I've just about finished stitching the heel support piece on. And again, I will make a square knot where it will not be visible. On the back side, and then run the ends up under a couple of threads. And the only thing left to do is the strap before we start to stitch the upper to the sole. Prepare this strap that's going to hold the buckle on the outside of the shoe. I cut it the same way I did the strap. I skived it a little bit just to thin it down just a tiny bit, so I already did that pretty well. And now I'm going to insert the buckle, and I want a slot for that right in the middle of the strap. So I have this kind of oblong punch which I'll center. Okay, got it. And pull the buckle through. Oh, when you do this, always make sure, check that you've got your tongue of your buckle on the outside. You don't want to do all this work and then end up with your buckle not working. So I think I'll cement this together and might stitch it a little bit, and then when we get to the place where it gets inserted, I'll show you how to do that. So it's time to stitch the upper to the sole. The first thing that I do is go to the mark that's right at the back of the heel and make a little loop. I have thread that's about 5 times the length of the sole, and I'm going through that same hole again so that that will kind of hold the thread without having a knot there. Then I go into my first hole, leave it to the inside, in the upper, and the first hole after the loop, going counterclockwise on the right foot and making these stitches. So the next one, I'm tucking the upper inside of the sole, and especially back around the heel you get gathers. Here's my next stitch. You get these gathers formed as you go. So it's important to give, it's really that this is tight. You don't want some loose bond here. You want this really tight. So each time that you take a stitch, give it a tug. So I'll continue here until it's time to do the buckle. Otherwise, just keep tucking and stitching and tugging as you go along. Go for it. I decided to add a toe box to this shoe. So I put cement on a thin piece of vegetable tan leather, and in the area where it will go onto the shoe. And I skived this edge so that there won't be anything that could be felt along the foot. So I'm going to line this up. And press it down. And I'll of course have to punch extra stitching holes there. So now I'm back around here. I'm ready to attach the buckle. So get this all pulled nice and tight. And I did stitch a little bit on it. And so the next stitching hole will go through. Make sure you have at least 2 stitching holes on any strap that you add. That's the only way it's going to stay in place. So I'm going through one of the stitching holes on the strap, then the next stitching hole on the upper, and the next stitching hole on the sole. Okay, and then repeat that. Of course, I want to really tuck that end down so it doesn't pop up. Might make sense to make that actually a little longer, so that the chances of it popping up are lessened. But on this shoe now, I'm just going to continue on around, and when I get so I'm tucking and tightening as I go, and when I get back around to where I started at the heel, then I think we'll have a shoe that's finished. Down to the finish line. Just a few more stitches to take here, and then the shoe will be pretty much done. Just a few things to do to check the strap and maybe stitch it to the shoe. So you notice how, especially back here at the heel, I'm pulling really hard and tucking the upper way inside. So keep gathering. Just a couple to go. So I'm ready to untwine the stitch that we started with, so that I can use it to make a square knot with this end. And it works out that no extra holes. I didn't miss any. Then I'll tie a square knot here. Tightly as possible. A pair of pliers would come in handy to pull it even tighter. And finish a knot. Then I'll weave these ends back under, so that, and it'll kind of pull the knot down in between the layers. So I'm so anxious to try this on and see if this technique works and if this shoe fits. So I've got Angela here, and we'll try it on, and the big moment has arrived. And here they are. I'm just so pleased how lovely they look and how nicely they fit. If you'd like to know more about simple shoemaking processes, please see my book, How to Make the Simplest Shoes, Nomocs, Lomocs and Fomocs. It's available on my website, www.simpleshoemaking.com.